Thank you everybody for finding time and being here today. And thanks again to Build Foundation for organizing this, for us, very important event, and I hope for everyone else. Yeah, I mean, foreign policy is a key area where I have been involved, and I somehow am still continuing to be, but I'll just make two remarks, if you don't mind, before we move forward on the points of my colleagues, who I think have given the very good picture of where we are, what are the challenges, and where we were. Just to note that it's interesting, Mika, in 1999 also it was the only case when after the elections it was not challenged, neither at the parliament, at the constitutional court, nor by the opposition, but it was, we all remember what circumstances it was going through. The public did not accept the results, but there wasn't much movement, which is a unique period. So I guess that can be considered one of the elections before of course, December 2018. And when it comes, I don't want to go into the issue of course, the women participation. I fully agree with most of the points that Anna raised, but I just want to mention the fact that it was probably the first time for the region, if I don't know anywhere else, when a transgender person was speaking in the Armenian parliament. Of course, what followed was even more important, but at least we have the openness of the level where you have a transgender person who can make it to the highest form of governing in the country and speak. This is a mental change. The level of this change for our patriarchal society, for our traditional society, is huge, and I think we are going generally throughout a very, very, very massive transformation as a society, which of course will be bringing up even more challenges, and it will be very hard to handle those and to be able to kind of channel it so it never becomes violent. So I think there are a lot of unique things that are happening, and a lot of unique things happened during this year in Armenia. And I think some of the things that are there already are irreversible. No matter what happens tomorrow, when people ask me, oh, do you think they can return? I say it's impossible. It's just, in my personal view, it's simply impossible. But referring to the foreign policy issues, Armenian revolution, for me, first and foremost, was a stereotype breaker. People were saying it's impossible to have a democratic situation unless you solve the Karabakh issue. Well, it seems like you can. People were saying it's impossible to do a democratic transition unless you have foreign support, both political and financial. It seems you can. It's impossible to do any kind of democratic transformation as long as you're so close to Russia. It seems like you can. And so on and so forth. And this creates quite a nervous situation in the neighborhood, especially in those countries where you have regimes and administrations that have issues with legitimacy. Because if we succeed, it's a direct challenge to them. We have to talk about this. We have to, I always bring this example. One of the things, and I'm not at an official capacity, so I can bring examples like this. When we were going through the period when Serge Sarkisyan resigned and we were about to go to the new parliamentary elections, some groups in Russia, in a remote town, were saying, "Khatim kak v Armenii, khatim kak v Armenii." We're like, no, please don't do that. So far, so good. Keep it local, because we don't want anybody to be involved. So one of the key, I think, factors for success was, from the very beginning, by the leadership of this revolution, and himself, Nikol Pashinyan himself, was this process, this revolution is a homegrown, fully local process which has nothing to do with geopolitics. It has nothing to do with foreign directions, and organic. Yeah, it's an organic process. It is. It was. I mean, I think in one of the recent interviews they were saying we were not even able to calculate how much money we spent, because, I mean, again, another stereotype breaker. You need money for that. Not really. I mean, we didn't really spend much money to do this. But you need to, of course, have it mature enough. The society has to be mature. So many factors should play in. So there is no one recipe to this kind of a transformation. However, it is unique in and of itself. When it comes to foreign policy, again, as the new administration came to power, what was announced before remains to be the same. We're not going to have any major shift in foreign policy. We're not going to have any U-turns in our foreign policy. However, this means all directions. We're in the Eurasian Economic Union with Russia and the others in the club. We're going to continue deepening and try to get what we can. We have our agreement, EU-Armenia famous agreement. We're going to deepen this process. In fact, yesterday, as you know, it was the Eastern Partnership's the 10 years in Brussels. Prime Minister Pashinyan was there. He flew from Brussels to China. That's as far as we go. So it could be everything. You don't necessarily have to make foreign policy priorities, in case of Armenia at least, in order to be able to be successful when it comes to post-revolution period. We'll see how far we go with this, but at least this is the philosophy that this administration has adopted. Another key part, and this has been in the program of the party that has the majority in the parliament, is special relations with Georgia and Iran. As you may recall, Prime Minister Pashinyan's first official trip was to Georgia, and this was a very clear statement to our Georgian colleagues and friends. We are a Giorgio-Armani government, right? We see our union as a unique one. We view an enormous amount of unused resources between Armenia and Georgia, even with integrating in different economic and other unions. We have been able to keep the relationships as high as possible throughout the last 3 decades. Now, this doesn't mean that there are no issues. Obviously, there are a lot of issues where we may agree or disagree, but at least there is a new level and a new approach on how we're going to, at least from Armenia, how we're going to view our future with Georgia, and it should have nothing to do with any third parties. This is our philosophy and this is our approach. Georgian-Armenian relations are Armenian-Georgian relations, and we are not going to link it to anything that is around, whether it's bigger players in the neighborhood, Turkey, Iran, Russia, Azerbaijan, EU, international organizations, etc. And in this respect, I think there is also a lot that probably there will be questions, a lot that can be discussed in our future presentation or approaches when it comes to multilateral venues, be it UN, be it the OSCE, be it the European Union and other places where we have been traditionally voting in different ways. This can be revisited too. We have to talk about these issues and not let this get on our ways, and there are no unsolvable issues, is at least what we see. And first and foremost, there are no issues that we are not ready to discuss. Of course, we are juggling with a lot of the existing interests in the region, including that of for example, the sanctions against Iran. What do you do with this, right? We have traditional long-going relations with Iran, then you have the problematic issues that come from the West, so you have to juggle with that. The Nagorno-Karabakh issue, where my colleague Mikhail has also touched upon, I think we can also, maybe there will be questions about it particularly, we can elaborate further, but I think we are finding also somewhat excited that this could be also a new beginning and a new start for negotiations. And we can talk about the very specific details, but I think one of the key things that has been announced from Armenia, at least since the revolution and during the days of the revolution, is that the new government in Yerevan, the new administration is in Yerevan, is not going to represent Nagorno-Karabakh in these negotiations. We do not have the mandate to represent Nagorno-Karabakh, and we believe that it will be constructive and the only way to move forward to actually have at some point the representatives of Nagorno-Karabakh around the negotiations table. When it comes to the Armenia-EU agreement, as I said, we are moving forward, and I think soon enough, I really hope that sooner than later we will start the visa liberalization dialogue with the EU partners, and at some point we'll have the visa liberalization action plan. I think our colleagues who deal with it can talk about it as well. Last week we had a US-Armenia task force meeting in Yerevan, which was elevated to a strategic level of partnership, which is also a very key element for us to continue and not only continue but deepen and actually use the unrealized resource when it comes to the US-Armenia relations, not only the diaspora that we have there, which actually is a natural bridge for us, but also on the bilateral state level to have a different level of communication. When it comes to military political cooperation, as you all know, Armenia continues to be part of the CSTO, the Collective Treaty Organization, Collective Security Treaty Organization, but it doesn't mean that we're not continuing and or furthering our relations with our Western allies when it comes to the NATO participation. We're still at the PFP, Partnership for Peace, and we are engaged both in Afghanistan and elsewhere. We have the UN context where we're in Lebanon and Africa and Eastern Europe. So we are saying the following: yes, there are issues that we see in the foreign policy, the way it has been conducted before, We believe that the level, the quality, and the forms of conducting foreign policy can and will change and is changing. However, we don't expect major changes, major shifts in our foreign policy. At the same time, this doesn't mean that we're not flexible in discussing any possible new avenues for cooperation. We are for combining interests rather than going against different interests. We, for centuries, like our Georgian friends and colleagues, have learned that becoming a battlefield for other players as a small country is not a good idea. And we also realize that directing those clashes to you is a messy business. But in and of itself, we have our big communities in the Middle East. As you know, Armenians are suffering in Syria. A lot of them, we still have a community in Iraq, and it seems like there are some developments there. So as a Republic of Armenia, obviously we don't carry legal responsibility for those people, but as people who have ethnic Armenian origins, we believe that our doors should be open for those who need hostage, who are in hostage or who are in trouble, and we will be, of course, facilitating the process wherever and whenever they need to be.